we are recording this so everyone is aware, just so we know what's been said and hasn't been said. So we can get that recording out to others once it's all finished. As I said before, I've asked Paul Davies from the NTC to come in on this particular one. This one was going to be about compliance on the side of the road, but because the law review is what it is, and it's sort of staring down the barrel of coming to fruition soon, the review that is, I thought it would be prudent to get Paul in to have a conversation with you and for you to have an opportunity to ask questions. I just ask you to keep the questions till the end, and once Paul's finished, then we can roll through all the questions. And there is an avenue to put your hand up, but I'm pretty sure with this bit of the size of the crew that it is now, we can handle what's needed. I just ask you to be, when it comes to that point, just to be conscious that others might be asking questions, and we can do it all individually when required. I also have David Smith, the President of the Australian Trucking Association, online here, and David comes in two capacities, one as an operator and two as the President of the ATA. And I like having David on this meeting so he can hear what owner-drivers have to say, and I think it's wonderful that the ATA want to listen and be interested around what you guys out on the road want to talk about. So Paul, what I'll do is I'll just hand over to you. Now, Paul's going to share some screens with you. If you haven't shared screens before, just bear with it. It does take a bit of time to transition across to the screen, so don't panic if you don't see anything straight away, and we'll go from there. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks, John. Much appreciated, and thanks to everyone for taking some time out of your day. Appreciate spending an hour on this sort of thing is away from core business and more importantly away from family. So I'll try and make it worth your while, I hope. And happy to answer some questions at the end. Let you know what's going on with the Heavy Vehicle National Law Review, which is coming up to a really important stage and you know, really offers some opportunities for everyone in the industry. So as John said, Paul Davies, I'll try and share the screen while I introduce myself as well, so we make sure we get that working okay. So yeah, Paul Davies from the National Transport Commission. Can everyone see that screen now?
It's coming up, yep.
Cool. Yeah, we've been charged on behalf of Transport Ministers with reviewing the Heavy Vehicle National Law, and for my sins, I suppose, I'm in charge of leading that on behalf of the NTC. So we've been working pretty hard on that, and we came up to an important stage, and hopefully that is something that we can get your input on as well, because that's something that's really important for us. So. Sorry, bear with me. Hopefully that screen, is that visible, John? We got everything okay there? Hopefully that screen's visible. I'm not sure if John's still with us there, but I can talk through it anyway. So what I'm going to run through today is the process and approach of the review, and then I'll move straight into some of the policy reform options that we're talking about. Those relate to options around duties, assurance, or as it's called in the current law, accreditation, technology, data and information sharing and potential, better fatigue management options, simpler, more transparent access decision making, safer, more productive vehicles, and finally, just to wrap it up, talk a little bit around the new regulatory structure and approach. I'll try and put the focus much more on what it means for operators as we go through. But just to give you a bit of context around the review, we set out with the idea that you know, the vision is for a better law, and a law that is risk-based. So rather than focusing on a lot of the admin that it does at the moment, really focusing on minimising harms and maximising productivity, and really focusing on what's important. So the goal is to produce a modern law that's flexible, risk-based, and ensures the safe and efficient operation of heavy vehicles on Australian roads. I want to take a step back quickly and just acknowledge that it's the operators who make a safe and efficient heavy vehicle operation on Australian roads. The law only supports that. So that's what we've really tried to come at it from. Empowering industry and government to take advantage of future innovation and technology, and overall improve safety and reduce costs for everyone. We think there's a lot of opportunities in the law to do that. we framed the whole thing really around the goal is a safe and efficient heavy vehicle journey. And we've said that that comes in three parts: the safe driver, or really safe people and safe practices, a safe and efficient vehicle, and a suitable route. So, vehicles that are well maintained, drivers that are, rested, competent and capable, operating on a route that's maximising productivity in a safe way. So that's the way we've tried to frame the review of the law. Where are we at in the process? We formally kicked it off the review in late 2018. Australia's Transport Ministers approved terms of reference for the review. We published 7 issues papers, really trying to get to the nub of the problems with the current law between March and October last year. And we got hundreds of submissions back. Really pleased with the result. Lots of operators provided their views, which is, from my perspective, I don't think we're going to get an improvement in the law unless the people who have to deal with it every day tell us what needs to be fixed. So I was really pleased to get a lot of feedback from industry in particular, but we got feedback from jurisdictions, from obviously the regulator's been really great in their involvement in this, police and everyone who's got something to do with the laws been involved. We took some of that feedback to transport agency heads in late 2019 and explained to them what the problems that were emerging appeared to be and what some possible solutions could be. And there was sort of broad acknowledgement of where things were headed. We want to keep them in the loop as we go. And in late 2019, November and December, we ran a handful of workshops with everyone in the room, so to speak, where we had a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of operators, police and the regulator in the room to work through what are some potential things we can do to improve the heavy vehicle national law. And those have gone into what I've got listed on the screen as a RIS, a regulation impact statement. That's just code for an analysis of options that we have to do as part of any sort of change of law. It's a big 200-page, very dry document. We know that people are not going to be itching to read it necessarily. So we also put out this 20-page document called HVNL 2.0, which gives you a really quick snapshot of what a future law could look like. Now, in the RIS and HVNL 2.0, we outline a whole range of options. They're not always options that we would say are the ones that are going to get up. Some of them contradict each other, but we've got to analyse them and show which ones are the better ones. So at the moment, we're in the stage of consulting on those options. So that's why we're at this really sort of critical stage, and feedback from operators is really important, because when I go to ministers in May next year and say, this is what we think the new law should look like, they'll want to know that people who have to deal with it, and operators particularly, have been consulted well and believe that this can work well for them. So in terms of some of the policy reform options, options for duties. So duties are pretty fundamental, of course, in the heavy vehicle national law. And at the moment, the primary duty applies to those in the chain of responsibility, which are the 8 defined parties that we have on the screen there. We've heard from a lot of operators and from others as well that there are certainly people outside the chain of responsibility who can influence safety. And there could be an option for bringing the primary duty to apply to those parties as well. People often ask who that might be. It could be a third-party repairer, for example. So they do have the capacity to influence safety and currently aren't caught up in the primary duty. Like any duty would apply, if it was to apply to them, it would only be to the extent that they can influence safety. So a repairer obviously is not influencing scheduling or something like that. But to the extent that they're influencing vehicle maintenance and roadworthiness, that might be something that's relevant. And as well, some clarifications around the primary duty. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to make it a lot clearer what is expected under the primary duty. We've also had some calls, and we've explored it in the RIS as a result of applying the duty to the driver. Now, that's sort of debatable how well that might work, or what the goal in doing that is. Drivers are pretty heavily motivated to do the safe thing on the road because they're right there. So, the argument isn't as strong as it would be for those who are influencing safety from outside of the truck, of course. But that said, we put forward one option where the current work health and safety duty could be applied to the driver. So it's actually no change to what a driver would have to do. But what it does do is recognise that in the heavy vehicle national law. In terms of assurance, and we use the word assurance just because we want to try and distinguish from the current law, but that's accreditation under the current law. Really what we're looking at there is to say that there's a massive diversity of heavy vehicle operations and operators, and that's something that I heard, you know, we've been all around the country talking to people who look after livestock, heavy haulage, you know, all sorts of different operations. And the diversity is huge. The capacity between operators and the desire and types of operations they do is quite varied. And one size doesn't fit all is the short way of describing that for the heavy vehicle national law. And a way to recognise that is to look at using assurance as a mechanism by which someone who is you know, able to manage more of the risk themselves, and I'll talk through this diagram at the bottom here, is able to have some alternative compliance options to do that. And that's not a foreign concept. We have things like BFM in the heavy vehicle national law now. If you can you know, show that you're actually doing some extra effort in the risk management, there is alternative compliance methods available. So that's not a new concept, but we think it can be expanded quite a lot. We've also got on this diagram this concept of enrolled operators, which I'll talk to in a moment. But when you look at risk management, you know, some of the key aspects of it are identifying the risk, working out how to treat it, and then actually implementing the controls. And as I said at the start, it's the actual operators of heavy vehicles who are always implementing the controls, and therefore, you know, really delivering the safety. That doesn't change no matter where you might be under an assurance scheme. But if you can demonstrate to, say, the regulator that you're able to manage the risks better, then there's more opportunity to actually take on how you manage the risks yourself. And we think we can take this a step further than the current law does and move towards a genuine safety management system for some operators who are able to then start working more hand in glove with the regulator, if you like, as a co-regulatory style model where they work out an operations management plan. With the enrolment side of things, this is something that we think actually can unpack a lot of the problems that are difficult to solve in the heavy vehicle national law as it stands. It's a pretty simple thing. It's simply putting your hand up and letting the regulator know that you exist and what your operations are. And it allows then the regulator to apply a lot more flexibility in compliance options for those operators. So I'll talk a little bit about that in more concrete terms, because some of this is a bit esoteric, I suppose. Technology, data and information. I just wanted to flag that as well. We see that as a real opportunity under the heavy vehicle national law. It's the 21st century and there's a real lot of opportunities to make good use of data. At the moment, the heavy vehicle national law doesn't stop data sharing between parties, but there's opportunities to improve how that's done. Or clarify more to the point how that's done, and done in a way that offers good protection for those who are in fact volunteering the data to be shared. We think it's really important, particularly in heavy vehicle operations, because a lot of data is generated through telematics devices, of course, which isn't really the same as putting your name on a website and meeting the privacy principles by having it looked after. I mean, it's essentially a surveillance device. It tells where you are, when you were, and all that sort of thing. So there needs to be really good protections, privacy protections for the use and handling of that data. So we see a couple of areas with data sharing. Firstly, information that doesn't need assurance. This is information that might be just beneficial and can add value to the system. In our late 2019 workshops, we actually had a lot of interesting discussions where operators were saying, well, gee, I'd be quite happy to let road managers know where I've been if I could get better access. And road managers saying, well, yeah, I'd be happy to give a bit more access if only I knew where I had to prioritise my maintenance. So it seemed like there was I felt almost like a broker at the table there. I said, well, we can make this happen, can't we? Let's try and open that door up. But where it comes to things that might relate to things that could be you know, prosecutions, things like that, where the data really needs to be absolutely rock solid, having a data assurance provider is necessary. And the IAP is covered in the law at the moment like that. It's only one application of many, and there's better opportunities to more broaden the protections that are provided under IAP to other areas of telematics use, for example. Better fatigue management is, I kind of wanted to dive straight into this because this is the one that operators and drivers especially just said the current law is really too difficult. I totally agree as we look through it. Straight away, the first thing that we've kind of said is that at the moment, the current law really looks at what type of vehicle is it and how far is it from its base. It's the driver who's the one who gets fatigued. It's not the vehicle, of course. And so we've said straight away, look, let's try and reframe this to look at driver risk, not vehicle risk. Beyond that, record keeping was seen as a real burden for a lot of people. I totally understand why. At one of our workshops, as a little anecdote, we handed out a mock work diary and asked everyone who came along without any preparation, you get to fill this out for today. I can tell you the compliance rate was pretty low, and I think some people were shocked at what's actually being asked of drivers and operators every day. So we really want to ram that point home that it's actually pretty complicated stuff, and we think it can be simplified and a lot of red tape reduction can occur there. Simpler work and rest hours. At the moment, the work and rest hours are obviously very complex. I don't need to tell anybody here that. The regulator's done a great job at deciphering the law. In fact, I go to the regulator's website when I want to try and work things out and then go back to the law because it's done such a good job at trying to interpret it. But the law itself is really complicated in this space. We think what is attempting to occur is to offer a bit of flexibility, a bit of comprehensive coverage and a bit of certainty. And when you mix it all together, you end up with about 55 or so rules that need to all be complied with, and that becomes incredibly complicated. We think by unpacking that, you can actually have a really simple set of probably 5 to 10 rules rather than the 55 rules that cover the majority of operators. And then for many other operators, there'd be regulator approved schedules that can meet their needs in a way that doesn't introduce huge amounts of complexity. And that's where this enrolment idea comes in, because you'd have to opt into that and demonstrate that, and nominate yourself to say, in fact, I want to use this other schedule over here that's a comparable risk schedule to the standard work and rest hours. And there's some flexibility that can come in with that. In those 5 to 10 work rules, by the way, we've got options in there that would allow for split rest breaks under limited circumstances, extended days under limited circumstances, and just getting rid of that really hard edge that sits in the current work and rest hour rules, even under BFM, but under standard hours particularly. So we think we can actually do a lot there that doesn't increase fatigue risk, but actually starts becoming a lot more operationally sensible. All of that said, work and rest hours are one set of rules, and they're only a proxy for managing fatigue. Since the law was first written, we've seen fatigue distraction detection technology go ahead in leaps and bounds. And this is something that we think that the Heavy Vehicle National Law should recognise well. A lot of operators, and there may be many around the table today, have proactively gone and installed these systems, and it's for safety. There's no doubt about it. It's a proactive approach to safety that's not even recognised in law. We think it should be. And those who have got the systems in place and using these systems should be able to start moving away from strict work and rest schedules and move towards actual fatigue monitoring and management. So I'm of the view personally that work and rest hours are a bit of an old news story. In a few years' time, we'll be looking at that as a really inadequate way of managing. I don't know how many years, but in a few years at least, we'll be looking at that as a pretty inadequate way of managing it. But when the first Heavy Vehicle National Law was written, that was all that was there. So we're at a really interesting transition point, and we certainly want the new Heavy Vehicle National Law to recognise that there's better ways to do this. And finally, the safety management system side, where you look at a more comprehensive approach to whole of system management. It's not just driver fatigue in isolation, but it's matched up against a whole range of other factors that are unique to the operations of a particular operator. Beyond that, a driver medical standard. This is the sort of thing that's a bit difficult to ask an individual operator to put in place on their own. So you need something that supports that through the law. And when I was talking before about risk management, one of the risks, of course, is that drivers aren't actually medically fit. And if you're demonstrating you're proactive on top of that, then you're taking on more of the risk management role, and alternative compliance options, which would be either more flexibility in your work and rest hours or that sort of thing, should be made available. And finally, right to stop if not fit to work. Now, you could argue that that's in there now, of course, because there's a duty on drivers and operators not to allow a driver to drive fatigued. But we did hear from many drivers who said that that's just, you know, impractical and very difficult to actually sort of stand up and say, yeah, I can't be driving right now because I'm fatigued. So this is sort of the other side of that duties coin, to actually say, look, if a driver nominates that they're not able to continue at a particular time, they have a right to stop and make sure they can get the rest up. And most, you know, obviously for people around this table as owner drivers, you'd be managing that quite well yourselves. Simpler, more transparent access decision making. So the biggest issues that come around with access relate to permits, timing, and some of the conditions that come across with that. We think a couple of simple tactics to do that is to reduce the number of permits to begin with, so enhancing general access and as of right access. And I will acknowledge the NHVR has been working very hard to transition permit access to notice access, and has had quite good success in that space. We think we can keep going and support them in the law to keep doing that. Also expedited decision making based on risk and precedent. So really having a shortcut method for where what's being proposed is actually either low risk or certainly that risk has happened or been assessed in the past. A revised process and time limits. There's currently some issues with the process itself. The law does place some hard limits on things that and can't actually unpack some issues if decisions aren't made in time. So we think there's opportunities there to improve that. And allowing delegated decision making. One thing road managers told us is quite a lot of them feel like they actually have a lot of difficulty resourcing, you know, road consent decisions, and at the moment the law makes them do it. Many of them would be quite happy to hand back to the regulator or to the state road authority or something like that, the capacity in certain cases, just to go ahead without having to go through the process that's specified in the law. And also a national approach to accrediting pilots and escorts, so particularly, of course, for oversize over mass, bringing some consistency across state borders, because that's certainly a big issue. In terms of safer, more productive vehicles, streamlined performance-based standards process. And again, I have to keep deferring to the regulator here and saying the regulator's moving in this direction as far as the law will let them at the moment, and we think there's room to open up the law and let them keep doing that and get better at it, because we know the desire is there to do that. But PBS vehicles are, on average, safer and of course more productive than general fleet vehicles, and the more we can encourage those higher productivity vehicles on the roads, the better. A national risk-based inspection regime, so rather than having different regimes based on where you're garaged, actually having something that's a bit more consistent around the country. Fast-tracked approvals for wider and safer vehicles. This is one that we think is a real opportunity most likely through a PBS type process, to actually bring some wider vehicles in. Now that might apply mostly to smaller vehicles at least at the start, but there's some opportunities to get a lot more productivity, but also to accommodate safety features. And an extra meter for sleeper cabins, which particularly for remote operators is something that they have told me is quite important, that in terms of getting that good fatigue management for the driver who's forced to sleep in the cabin, having some extra dispensation for the actual sleeper cabin would help a lot. Finally, the new regulatory structure and approach. So at the moment, it takes a couple of years to change a law. There's good things and bad things with that. It means that it's nice and predictable, but it also means it's not very responsive to things like technology and business practice changes. So we think there's some good opportunities to push things down from the primary legislation into, if not regulations, but into things like standards and codes of practice, which allow most likely the regulator to take a much more proactive role, and things can change in a matter of months rather than a matter of years. As technology evolves, standards can evolve much more quickly than a law can. But there are things that belong in the law where you want certainty as well. At the moment, there's some technology and process tied up in the law. Better targeted enforcement efforts. I certainly don't want to oversell what a change in law can do. It can't force change in attitude or culture or anything like that, but what it can do is shift the focus again to that risk and harms type focus. So we don't want to have efforts into, is your diary got the right spelling and crossed out in the right direction? We want to move to, are you actually fatigued while you're driving, or are you managing that properly? And penalties and sanctions that are aligned to harm. So at the moment in the law, there's a few things that are, quite heavy penalties really for what are quite low harm or low risk breaches. Whereas there are some there's some quite substantial breaches in there that face quite minor penalties. And they're just weird little anomalies in there. So there needs to be a better alignment through that. Put in really simple terms, if you're trying to do the right thing and you're taking good care of it, you shouldn't be getting hit with big penalties. That should be reserved for those who are really recalcitrant operators who don't want to do the right thing. So the website we've set up specifically for the review is hvnlreview.ntc.gov.au. I'm happy to share the presentation, so you don't need to scurry to write it down. And that's the dedicated email address there, so we can always answer any questions that might pop up after this session's over, or if there's not the opportunity to raise it now, or you'd prefer to raise it privately, I'm happy to do it that way. We've got, as I said at the start, we really want operators to have their say about how the current law works for them and what they think can work well in the future law. So at that website, typically when people put in a submission, they might write a 20-page submission. I don't want to force everyone to be doing that sort of stuff. So we've tried to make this a lot easier. If you go to the Heavy Vehicle National Law Review website, in about 10 minutes, you could probably type one in. It gets sent straight through. It's all electronic. And we can still regard that as a formal submission to the review. So we've really tried to make it as easy as possible. As I said at the start of this, your time's valuable, and we don't want to have you wasting it on top and tailing, long-winded submissions when you don't need to. So just as a reminder, to help prompt the discussion, I suppose, the policy areas that I talked about were options for duties, assurance opportunities, technology, data and information, better fatigue management, simpler, more transparent access, productive vehicles, and that new regulatory structure and approach. But I'll finish it there, John, and open it up. I think the question and answer is more valuable. I'm happy to explain any of it further, but yeah, really keen to hear what people's views are, concerns are, or what some of the key areas for reform are from your perspective.
Thanks, Paul. Now everyone will get an opportunity to ask, so please don't talk over everyone and it'll all just come out as a mumble. There is an opportunity down the bottom of your screen in participants. It depends on what sort of screen you're on, but if you press that, you can put your hand up, so raise a hand. And I can see that. I'll see who's got their hand raised and I can get you to talk. But first of all, I suppose if anyone can find that and put their hand up now who wants to ask a question, please do so. But does anyone, and I hate asking this because I'll get 21 people yelling at me, but does anyone have any questions of Paul? And we'll see how we go with just asking, does anyone have any questions? Okay, Glenn. Okay, Glenn, off you go. No, you're on mute, Glenn.
I'll put my hand up, John.
All righto, just a second. Righto, we're seeing people got their hand up. So I've got Kirsten's got a hand up. Go for it, Kirsten.
I guess from our point of view, I probably just wanted to make a note. Everything that Paul was saying, obviously with the review process, I agree with. With our business, we come from a truck driving business as well as a farming business. So on one side of the thing, on one side, we can see improvements there with the trucks and the regulations with fatigue management. But I guess where my question is going to be targeted is more from our farming background. So we regularly need to acquire a permit so that we can cart and implement on the main road for a short distance to our cane paddocks. One of our implement is over width by 100 mil, which require us at the present law to get a agricultural dimensions permit. Mm-hmm. And I guess, you know, for us being a, you know, small family business, that we need to go 5 kilometres on the road in a raw stretch of the Bruce Highway, the regulations say right now that we need 2 escort vehicles in front and behind our tractor. Now, as you can understand, you know, we sat back and we sort of looked at the risk assessment. It's a wide open road. There's plenty of areas. There's an overtaking lane. There's plenty of areas for oncoming traffic to overtake, and we just feel that the stipulation at the moment, it's a broad spectrum answer. It's not individually assessed, and at the moment, it would, for us, it looks like it would cause more risk to have 2 escort vehicles on such a small stretch, you know, just than having just one ag pilot. Yeah, and it look from that standpoint, it just makes it really hard for us to sort of even, number one, be able to do that. You know, I'm sure you guys are aware, you know, with farming, if the afternoon and the wind's right and the weather's right and you want to make a call to get that implement to the other side of the road, the current restrictions make it very, very difficult. You know, there's overtaking lanes and we just get knocked back and say it's blanket rule and this is what it is. And I guess for us, it's against everything that you've spoken about. So hopefully that's on the radar, but I don't know if there's anything we can do sort of sooner than, you know, the 2 years, or what opportunities there are for that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You say it's only 100 mil over width. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I haven't got it. Probably couldn't give you a specific sort of response on it, except you know, from the permit side of things, there would be opportunities to speed up the process of getting that, but that's not what you've raised here. You've raised the escort issue, and so perhaps in that review of the escorts and pilots and escorts, there might be opportunities there to recognise that, hey, you know, if we can at least get down to 1 pilot in that case, or give probably more importantly, the general thrust of the law is to give the regulator more capacity to assess that risk on an individual basis. And rather than simply saying there's one law for all, to recognise that if you are in fact on a lower traffic road, you're only moving a few kilometres, the risk is quite low compared to you know, having to bring in you know, something that's 3.5 metres or 4 metres wide, you know, across state borders and things like that. By comparison, it's quite a lot different. So there's going to be more opportunity for the regulator to be able to do that, but certainly in the pilots and escorts side of things, we'll be able to look at that a bit more for a bit more consistency. I'm not sure where you're actually based, Kristen. Are you?
Up in North Queensland near Ingham, just okay. An hour north of Townsville. Okay,
yeah. One of the other things that I'll flag as well, that we put in the RIS as an option, because we've heard from a few people who have said similar things, is that we put the idea of a remote zone in the RIS, which essentially says that, look, remote areas really are a different kettle of fish than you know, if you like, the intercapital runs, which is what so much of the law seems targeted at. You know, and the regulator could use that remote zone as a factor in any risk assessment that it does. So that's not to say that that you would necessarily not wind up still needing 2 escorts. I can't speak to that specific situation, but it does say that the regulator can actually start having regard to more issues when it's doing risk assessments to what can be permitted.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Now we'll just go to Glenn and then I'll go to Rod. So, and then I've seen you, Ian Wild, as well. So, Glenn Castanelli.
Thanks, John. I found the unmute button. What about the need for the driver? Like, none of what we've discussed so far in the review gives the driver the ability to be able to pull up and still get paid, because that is the biggest factor in fatigue still, is that drivers are held by the fact that they've got to make an income that day to keep on going. You know, like, unless we address that issue, everything that we're changing is still not going to have an impact. You know, schedulers and operators who are in the office or who aren't in the truck out on the road, they still get paid whether, you know, whether they go and have a break or not. But the driver's got to keep on going. You know, until we address something about the way the driver gets paid, it doesn't matter how you change the laws, you're never going to, I know you've heard it all before, John, but you're never going to stop the driver. You're never going to give him the ability to pull up because he's fatigued.
Yeah, and I suppose, Glenn, the law doesn't deal with pay and pay rates and how people get paid.
It's a flaw in the system, John. It's a flaw in the system that wages aren't part of this review. And the way that not the wages themselves, but just the way that people are paid.
Yeah.
To be paid by the kilometre, to be paid piece rate, and then to be expected to manage your fatigue with, pull up. If you pull up where you've been, you're fatigued because of controls out of your own during the day, and you pull up, then you might miss out on a whole day's work the next day.
Thanks, Glenn. Paul, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, look, John, you started down the road. I was going to say, of course, that the terms of payments aren't really in the scope of the heavy vehicle national law, but I totally acknowledge it's an issue. And one of the things that's a current issue in the law that does make it more difficult, the way you finished it, Glenn, if I've got this right, is that if you take a rest at a certain time, you do find yourself locked into a schedule going for the rest of the week like that. Where you've got your 24-hour reset breaks that make things a lot more difficult. One of the things we're proposing in the new way of looking at fatigue management, if you're working to work and rest hours, is to actually use a rest as a reset rather than the clock, so that you actually have a lot more flexibility. Not that you starting one day at 9 p.m. and the next day at 6 a.m. kind of thing. Not extreme stuff. But you're not locked into forward shifting hours or forward shift rotations, which is something that does get caught up when you decide to take a longer rest or a longer stop. So even though it might not solve that particular issue, hi Sal, see you to the side there. Even though it might not solve that particular issue, it certainly takes a lot of the pressure off of that forward shift rotation problem that we recognise in the current work and rest hours is a big deal. It's holding a lot of drivers up. And we know if they get caught at depots at distribution centres or something like that, it really can stuff them around.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Rod, I think I got you next, and then Ian, I've got you next. So Rod Hennepin.
Yeah, mate, how are you going? Three things. I have read the RIS2, and the first thing that comes to me is that it virtually says, if you have the technology, you can have what you want, but other than that, get nodded. And I know that that's rude, but there is no recognition of a driver that's driven 10 years without an accident, that has an excellent record. There is no recognition whatsoever in that document of people's ability to manage their fatigue till now. Your mate said there that they're looking at split rest. That's excellent. The one thing that would solve the problem, as he just said a minute ago, and you know I went to court because the law is ambiguous. It says that that when they count forward from the end of your major rest break, it says the relevant rest break. Now, all you have to do is change the wording that you count forward from your last major rest. That takes away 90% of the problem with those piss-ass overlap fines, and it might be an overlap of 15 minutes or half an hour. But the other thing is, when then someone gets to that point where they're issued a ticket and you ask for a review, that review doesn't recognise your record. And I know, I'm talking personally here. The copper that pulled me up, I said, did you look at my record? He said, it's not bad. I've never had a fatigue infringement in 30 years. I sought a review. I was told, get nodded, go to court. I went back and explained the situation, the 7 hours, the ambiguousness of the law, get nodded, go to court. Now, I shouldn't be put in that position for a 15-minute overlap, and until we recognise those things in the law, nothing will change. So I asked that those things be put on the table, and I haven't seen any of them recognised thus far.
Thanks, Rod. When we talk about using assurance to try and take people up out of the work and rest hours, it doesn't mean that you have to have technology. So that's the first thing I'll say. Systems that can use technology, but they don't have to use fatigue and distraction technology, can be recognised under that. So for people like yourself, experienced drivers who you know are taking you know precautions that you know mean that you're a safe driver on the road, then that can be recognised. So you can actually still, even if you don't want to use fatigue and distraction technology, potentially move towards other systems. Some of the other schedules as well will give some flexibility there. It's very difficult to use a record of drivers for an assessment, if you like. Not to say it can't be done. And what we want to try and do is structure the law in a way that actually allows the innovation to occur, you know, once the law's in place. Because I don't want to say that in the two or 3 years that we've had to try and put this together, that that all the innovation is going to be exhausted at that point. No way. There's going to be a lot of improvement, a lot of good ideas, and most of them will come, you know, many of them will come out of the regulator, and that's the point, is to give them the power to actually start recognising other ways that are equivalent risk for fatigue management. As I say, the current problem where you've got the overlap of 24 hours, that can definitely be pulled out. That's a problem in the law. That's more complex than the drafting you're talking about. It's actually quite a complicated set of rules at the moment, with 55 rules. Getting it down to 5 or 10 will make it a lot easier for people to understand it, which means police on the side of the road as well able to understand it a lot better. And you should, and you know, I can't say exactly what will happen, Rod, but you should be less likely to find yourself in that situation where, you know, someone's debating on the side of the road what an ambiguous set of laws means.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
But Rod, I do want to stress as well, obviously we've spoken a lot through the consultation of this review as well, and you're more than welcome to get in touch with me with particular ideas on this, because as I said, the innovation's coming from a lot of places, certainly not all from me, and it can't come all from me. It'll be a rubbish law if that's what happens. So,
okay, thanks, Paul. Ian Wild. Hello, Ian.
Yep, I've got the right button, John. Thank you. Yes, there's a lot of talk on the logbook scene, and everybody's covered it amply on my regards. But I want to raise a question about heavy vehicle charging, road user charging. What is the intention of that? You know, because at the moment, most livestock and rural transporters are subsidising line haul operators that have the ability to double and triple shift trucks, and we're grossly subsidising farm or primary producer registration. We only have the ability to put one driver in one truck and do 12 hours a day, whereas a line haul operator can run that truck 24 hours a day with a number of drivers going through it, and he pays the same registration as what I do. And the farmers, a lot of farmers are out there doing just as many miles as what we do on exceptionally cheap registration, and not having to have transit insurance, and a host of other implications that are involved for the commercial carriers.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I'm sure John will have something to say as well, but I do have to say, look, this is not something that I can give you a good steer on. The Commonwealth's leading work on the heavy vehicle road reform type and charging type space. From our perspective, I suppose the key thing is that we want to make sure that the heavy vehicle national law doesn't cut across improvements to road user charging heavy vehicle charges as well. So we work with them to a certain extent, but there aren't that many areas, to be honest, where the heavy vehicle national law will cut across that. So I'll suggest having a look at the Commonwealth website. They've got some good material on what they're doing in that space. It's not one that I'll try and address here, and certainly not as part of this review. If we make it too big, we will get nowhere. We really want to focus in on the regulatory side of things.
Thanks, Paul. Does anyone else, I'll just open it up again. No hands are up, but I'll also understand you might not be able to see it. Angelo, go for it.
Yeah, right. As you know what I do, like mine's in the heavy haulage and oversize and mass. Now, the 28 days for a permit should be 7 days. We're owner-operators on the side of the road. What do? Sit in a remote area for 28 days and people say, we've got 28 days. Well, we haven't. That needs to be brought back at least to 7 days, John. And also, we went to a national law of logbooks, driver's license. How come we haven't gone to a national permit system? We've got a gazette in South Australia, New South Wales. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, New South Wales, South Australia, Victoria, we can only go to 30 metres. In Queensland, pay $74, you can go to 35 metres. How do you justify that? Right. Then now you've changed it because NHVR, you've changed it. I just renewed all my permits for Queensland. Went from $74 to next year it's going to be $740. Because I've got to get 10 permits that did one permit. So that's more paperwork we've got to carry, more work. And then get confused for which permit's which, right? And then so much for the free trade between states. We can't go to Western Australia unless we're accredited to go into Western Australia.
Yeah.
So, and for the 1 metre extra on our sort of work, because we're living in a truck for 3 and 4 weeks at a time, that'd be ideal. But as soon as you grant a metre extra for a bigger sleeper, the likes of Linfox, Tolls, they'll put it on a trailer.
Yeah,
it should be from the pin forward, not pin back.
It absolutely is, Angelo. That's yeah. We know as soon as you put a meter on that someone's going to try and use that meter. We get that.
Yeah.
So we've said that's a meter over and above what you would otherwise have, and it can only be for the cabin. It's not for, as you say, for the kingpin forwards, not for freight carrying.
Yeah. Well, see, I got a bigger sleeper on this truck, but I've had to do away with the bull bar to keep me under the 19 metres, where I've already wiped the front out, and it's only 2-year-old already because you got no bar on the front.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks, Angelo. Thanks, Angelo. Paul, I think Sal Petrosito is here. For those that didn't see him off to my left, or your right, he'll just make a couple of comments.
So, Angelo, on that issue of WA and needing to be in mandatory accreditation, we're doing some work with the WA government now around potentially mutual recognition. So if you're on any of the NHVR type accreditations, you might have the ability to use them when you go into WA. It's still early days, but there's work progressing on that. In relation to your comment about the permits in Queensland, I wouldn't mind understanding a little bit more about that, but we might take it offline. And if you can let John know exactly what that issue was, I wouldn't mind drilling down a bit. We're trying to work with Queensland to get them to adopt the National Awesome Notice, but at the moment, their restriction on mass has meant that it's probably not beneficial to industry, but we're still working with them to see whether they can join that national notice.
Yeah, well, at least up here we've got 35 metres.
Yeah, you've got length.
Yeah.
And in reference to your 28 days, Angelo, I don't think, and I think Paul has probably seen that mentioned a lot in a lot of the reviews coming back to him about 28 days being reduced, and I think that's been heard loud and clear.
Angelo,
it's an option in the RIS, Angelo. I've got to say, so it's in there. We've talked about the 7 days. That's in the RIS. You know, what we think is there's classes of access decisions, if you like. There's some that you can say, look, there's been precedent here. You don't need to actually go and seek further consent. There's others where you say, this is pretty straightforward. We can wrap it up in 7 days. And there's others that will take that longer time. So, you know, we can't say exactly how they'll all go, but the idea is to crunch down at least as many as we can. And we know Sal and the team have got some you know, excellent processes in place that they're just hoping the law can catch up and help them out with. In terms of some of the accreditation stuff as well, I'll acknowledge what the NHVR and Western Australia are doing. There's doing some good work to try and do that. And again, in the law, we've got some options there that will bring better alignment across across the non-participating and HVNL jurisdictions. So, you know, our goal is to get as seamless an operation for people as possible across those borders, including across the ones inside the participating jurisdictions. We know they're all different, and I can say straight away that there's a big battle, and it's a long battle around you know, opening up roads for access. We want to change the law to set it up to make that work better, so that it's an easier thing to do over time. We can't go and prescribe it amongst the law, because I need to get ministers to agree to it. And the fact is, they won't agree to something that that suddenly, you know, opens up roads that they haven't had the chance to assess. So, you know, there's a bit of pragmatism that's got to be done in all of this too.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I'd just like to open it up to others now. If anyone else, Kirsten, was that a posted note that your mum has said, please ask this question?
Nathan Richardson, John,
yeah.
I had a question.
Just a second.
Mum did ask me to make mention. I probably should have mentioned it before, but just a point on it's very difficult to actually read and understand and follow what the rules are for obtaining a permit. I just wanted to make that comment as well. Just, yeah, it's difficult for us to actually understand what we have to do sometimes.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, I think that's been acknowledged too. Nathan, I've got you with you, so over to you, Nathan.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, Nathan Richardson, farmer in Tasmania, also representative of the Tasmanian Farmers and Graziers Association. So this is the second presentation that I've heard this week, pretty much the same. The other one was on Tuesday from Nat Road.
Yeah.
And I listened more carefully today, trying to pick up on some things that you actually are announcing that is going to change for the better. And I haven't heard it again today, really. We've heard that some work around fatigue and changing that. But out of all the submissions that have come from right around the country, can you actually give us something that is going to change? And from an agricultural point of view, we need in the law freedom to operate without the brand new trucks and without all the gizmos and gadgets that the big boys in town want to run in their trucks to win the contracts.
Yep.
And we need freedoms in the law that attract people to want to run a trucking business. That's number one. And we need also the law to recognise that people are just going to work and they don't want to come home with empty pockets and empty wallets. And you said earlier that the responsibilities aren't going to change for the driver, yet there's going to be a push to make a mechanic liable. And I would have thought a driver is in front of a mechanic in terms of liability, law, and responsibility. So I think if there's going to be a push to make mechanics, bring them into the law, they cost enough already. Now you're going to tell repair shops that they're now liable. I think that's going down the wrong path. They're already accredited, they're already trained, they've done apprenticeships, they have whatever they have to be a mechanic these days, the same as a doctor or whatever else. So Paul, can you actually tell us here today, here's something that got submitted by someone from wherever around Australia, and it's a great point, and we're going to push to have this in the law. And that's number one. And number two, I think the biggest hurdle that this review is going to get is the Treasury Department and Transport Ministers are willing to take a hit to the state coffers in the terms of fines that they collect from a captured audience, which is the trucking industry around Australia. Are they going to be prepared to accept less money, or is it just going to be a shuffling of numbers? So we're going to have increased compliance costs or increased auditing costs, or what we've heard in the last 12 or 18 months, this O license, operator's license, come in. So I know that was a lot, so I'll shut up now.
No, that's all right, Nathan. That's good. And look, I apologise that you heard such a similar presentation. I didn't know if we had anyone today who was there on Tuesday as well. I've tried to give a consistent presentation because I don't want to try and give a different message around the place.
Oh, it's definitely consistent.
Cool. In terms of me announcing changes, I can't do that, and that's about how we make law in Australia. That's it's a minister's decision, and only I can make. All I can do is make recommendations. So the purpose of the NTC is to do these sort of couple of years' work ahead of making those recommendations, so that ministers are informed of what can work and what can't. So, but the things I will say is that the things that have come through loud and clear is fatigue management needs improvement, and I believe we will be able to make a case to do that. The access opportunities are there, and I believe we can make a case to do that. And the backbone around the assurance side of it, I believe there's a good sense of desire to make some changes in there. So I can't say, yes, this will change or that won't change. But what I can say is that there is a broad sense that there's plenty of opportunities for improvement here, and what we're putting together and trying to put together with your help, of course, is here's a system that can work better. In terms of things like fines and things like that, it's a tough one. I can't say what will go through anyone's mind in how they consider this sort of thing, but road safety is a big deal for ministers. They're interested in seeing that. I can tell you that pretty confidently. The issue of being able to fine people is not normally what they're looking to do. Look, I can't say what the net result might be in the end, except to say that what we want to do is to get a better alignment of any penalties with actual risks, so that you're not getting fined for trivial things, really, is what we want to avoid. That fines do reflect only, really sort of gross negligence and things that are, really problematic. And these are the operators that I think anyone who turns up to hear about law reform would like to see.
Nathan, just on your...
Sorry, go ahead, Sal.
I was just going to say, Nathan, in relation to your question around the mechanics, drivers are already captured under the HVNL.
Yeah, good point.
A lot of issues that we do have some concerns around the role that part plays in the whole supply chain, and we do believe that they do have an obligation under the primary duties, which is why there's this discussion around including mechanics. Just because you've got your mechanic qualification doesn't mean that you're keeping it up to date or it's being refreshed and all those sort of things. So it is something that I know Paul is looking at as part of the review, but that's the reason why, because drivers are already captured under the HVNL under several other obligations, but the repairers who are critical to ensuring that a safe vehicle is put on the road aren't at the moment.
And it's not just repairers, it's potentially others. And it can sound like capturing, if you like, new people, but what it is recognising who has the influence over safety. So the alternative is the operators in the gun, really. And what you want to be able to say is that if you've done due diligence as an operator and done the best you can, and you shouldn't be held to account for someone else cutting a corner. So it's actually about protecting operators, if you like, as well as another way to look at that. And the other point I wanted to pick up on as well, Nathan, was you talked about having the sort of whiz-bang equipment versus not. I think I made the point, I think it was to Rod before, that it's not all about saying technology is the only way. It's about recognising that technology in the law. We know there's people who've got some really good systems in place that use old technology, and they're actually good safety management systems. The tech's not a fix-all. We know that. It's the systems that go around it and the management that goes around it. If you plug in fatigue detection technology and do nothing else, well, it's probably not going to do you any good.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Nathan. Anyone else got any? Okay, Glenn Castanelli, we got you there.
Thanks. Look, I just wanted to mention that the airline pilots seem to be assessed on the amount of hours that they accumulate as to their experience and their ability to fly different sizes of airplanes. And our industry, we store and document every hour a driver spends driving a truck. I've got boxes and boxes full of work diaries going back 15 years. And, you know, I've got lots of red marks in there, but I've never had a logbook fine. And I agree with Rod. We should be able to use that documented evidence to, you know, our licenses, our record, and the evidence in the boxes should be able to be used for our, you know, to give me better fatigue management. You know, because I've obviously, you know, been able to, you know, demonstrate that I can operate, you know, fatigue regulated heavy vehicle.
Yep.
That's all, John.
I'm just making a note of that, Glenn. If I might work with John to have a chat with you and Rod about what you're talking about here, because there might be ways we can do that. You know, I can't promise what that would be, but you know, as I say, the innovation's not all going to come from me. I want you guys to be telling us what will work best.
Yep. Okay, I can make that connection happen. That's no problem. Has anyone else got any question? I'm conscious of time. It's 5:08. I did start a little bit late, but we seem to be at the end of questions. Has anyone else got any questions? Well, looks like we're done. I just want to say thank you to Paul Davies from the NTC for taking the time this afternoon to talk to us. And I just also wanted to once again thank all of you for pulling up on the side of the road, wherever you are, taking the time to connect with us. This is about the third one we've held of these, and I've held your attention for a whole hour and over an hour again today. A little bit less people than I thought, but we probably had some little difficulties at the start with getting people in. But again, 20 people out there sitting on the side, or 18 or 19 people sitting out on the side of the road talking to us again is a very good thing, and we will continue these into the future. So Rod is putting his finger up. I don't know if he's telling me he's out, or does he want to ask a question?
And Peter Shields as well, John.
Okay. Off you go, Rod.
And I just wanted to ask, what other feedback is the NTC getting? Are they getting good other feedback? Do we need to go and push other people to contribute? And are they getting enough people involved? What can we do to improve that?
Thanks, Rod. We are getting some pretty good feedback. We certainly have gotten a lot of good feedback so far. It's early stages for the RIS consultation, so we've got a handful of submissions in, and they've been from industry for the most part so far. But that's pretty normal and what I'd expect at this time. So I expect states and territories to be sort of towards the end with their feedback. So certainly we want to hear as much as possible. As I said, we've got some short form ways for people to get that advice across to us, but we are, you know, doing our best to keep talking to people. With the COVID situation, it's made it a lot more difficult. It's why we're trying to use these remote sessions, and thanks John for recording it as well, and for putting it on and recording it so it can get out to a few more people to see what we're talking about, because we really want to encourage a good piece of feedback from a diverse range of industry operators. So if you tell your friends, I suppose, right, is all I can say. You know, really encourage people to put their two bobs in and let us know what we need to be prioritising.
Thanks, Paul. And there's someone else who had another question, I believe. No?
Yeah, go Peter.
Peter Shields?
Yeah, am I there now?
Yeah, mate, you got that.
Just listening to Paul and all that with what's going on, and coming from just a single truck operation. Couple of things. We've been doing free trans for a mate I have now. His contract's just due. He's a 5 truck operation. Now he's running electronic logbooks, fatigue management, mass management, all the management you got to have, doing everything by the book. Couldn't ask for a better operator, really. At the end of the day, he's really switched on to the operations. Now he's going up for contract against a bigger company. He's basically gone in under him on a fair bit of the price. Now, as a small operator, trying to compete against this and run against that. Like at the end of the day, a small operator wants to keep the prices up. They keep them vehicles maintained more. I feel like we're all us little operators, and there's many here now. That's a big issue to anyone. Like the price of the jobs, like we're all fighting the big boys on prices, and that makes it hard for us to run all these fatigue managements and everything like that too, and keep that in place. And that's just something I think Paul take into consideration when we do things too. You know, the small bloke's trying to make a profit out of the job, not compared to a big guy who's got 100 trucks to compete with. It's maybe something that's to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. It's we don't want to have set up a law that has an industry that's not competitive anymore because people can't get into it or people can't operate in it. So we don't want that to happen.
Well,
obviously, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I just know personally, Paul, the bloke that's actually against the operations is going against this other mate of mine for the job. Like they're a local company to our area. Now I reckon they've got the biggest lot of cowboys around. And this bloke's running, 5 or 6 trucks, professional operators. So, it's an ongoing saga wherever we go, whether it's, New South Wales, Victoria, anywhere. So I think we really got to take that into consideration. The small little guy, we're trying to make a profit out of the business. We're not here just for the charity of the things. Yeah, we all like to get out of bed and make money for the day. So that's a big thing. I think it's got to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We all try to run by the book, but at the end of the day, mate, if you can't afford to sit at home for 12, 14-hour days to have a break so you get your book right, at the end of the day, you still got to try and make your finances at the end of the day and pay your bills.
Yeah.
And that's something that, we need to take into consideration when we do these laws too.
Yeah, we're trying to reduce a lot of that overhead, that red tape that you're dealing with that sort of stuff, with compliance and that sort of thing. So, we can't fix the contract negotiations, but we can certainly not encourage things that have people cutting corners.
And that's why I just find this is what big companies can cut corners more. And mate, it's tick the boxes. Like a little bloke at the end of the day. This is where we make our money. This is where we survive. We're going to have our equipment right because we can't afford to be off the road. We can't afford to be 3 or 4 days broken down on the road. So you're going to maintain your vehicle. You're going to have your tyres changed. You're going to have your greasing done.
Yeah.
So, we tick the boxes, a lot of us do. And I would say 95% of everyone on here would agree with it. It's a small operator ticks the boxes and makes sure the equipment's up to date and they're doing the right thing. It's the big companies you're fighting against. And, that's the big thing. Big companies, mate, there's blokes in offices tick the boxes for us. They're not out there doing the real thing.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference when it goes to making the laws that don't come into consideration, I don't think.
Yeah,
that's just the way I feel about it, yeah.
Thanks. I take your point, and I acknowledge everyone who's taken the time out today. As I said, this is going to be good operators around this table. You don't pay attention to this sort of stuff if you don't care about the industry and care about your operations. Totally get that.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'll just say again, thanks for taking the time out in your busy schedules, pulled over in Gundawindi. Enjoy Gundawindi over there, Angelo. And wherever else you all pulled up or in your offices, thank you very much. We will hold another one of these, and the next one will be around compliance on the side of the road. I'll have the compliance for Director of Compliance in Southern Region will come and chat to us about our officers on the side of the road, how they're operating, what they're doing, et cetera, and we'll give you some numbers around what we're looking at and what we're seeing out on the road. So thank you very much for coming in, and you can pass the word that this has been what you wanted to get out of it, and I'd love to see some more people come to these. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Thanks very much. Stay safe.